Good morning again. We have our first panel. Before we start the panel, I wanted to introduce the moderator, Mike Vorhaus. Mike Vorhaus is our presenting sponsor this year, Vorhaus Advisors. Mike has supported Techtalia since day one. He sponsored the t-shirts the first year, the second year, and the third year. Sponsored last year and this year. Mike is an expert, a renowned worldwide expert in wine, but not just that, in everything in media, entertainment, gaming, and more. He's advised, supported, invested, and mentored some of the top CEOs, executives, and founders across the entertainment, gaming, and other industries as well. Companies he's invested in like DraftKings and Skills have gone on to incredible valuations and have been public, and he's currently the senior advisor at PowerUp. He's my partner at the SPAC. He is an incredible friend, and he's my biggest supporter. And I'd like to welcome up to the stage Mike Vorhaus for the Metaverse. What is it and why you should care?
Hi.
He's going to do an introduction to the
Hey,
panel.
Mike. Nice to see you. I love Cherry. She's wonderful.
She's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gabriel. That's. I only wish my parents were here. I begged my husband to come, but he said he might grace us with his presence in a bit. I'll just say very briefly that those of you who have ever been in business partnerships, it's very different than having employees and having bosses. There's something interoperable, a word we'll touch on, no doubt, in this talk, about having a business partner you trust. You don't have to go to every meeting. You don't have to make every decision. And Gabriel, despite his incredible youth, I am literally twice his age, has been an amazing business partner, along with Jack Trenton, who's the 13-year president of PlayStation USA, and our chairman at PowerUp, Bruce Hack, who today is commemorating in Bloomington, Indiana, which is nowhere. I mean, don't even ask where Bloomington, Indiana is. Though IMPay has a nice facility there. He built the library. But his wife, the country's leading lawyer in Title IX, which is about women's sports and women's empowerment in sports, is receiving the Distinguished Alumni Award. Bruce is an amazing guy. He's taught all of us a lot, and he was the former vice chairman of Activision Blizzard. And you all know Blizzard because of World of Warcraft and Overwatch, etc. So I just want to say there's really nothing like a great partnership, and Gabriel has been that and much more. Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey. I feel we might be in the Metaverse, or perhaps one of the Metaverse. I'm not even sure. Is it Metaverses or Metaversi?
Or multiverses.
Multiverses. Somebody write that down. We want to steal that. I just say for one brief minute about Techtalia, which I think is an amazing concept. I understand Davos is becoming less and less popular, and I think in the next year or two, we'll hear people saying, screw Davos, I'm going to Techtalia. So I'm very excited. But you know, it's also interesting to just take a minute and talk about the Italian history in technology, in medicine, in design, in art, in religion, and education. And it took me hours to go through a list of famous Italian scientists and engineers and inventors. And I picked just a few of my favorites just to emphasize the incredible impact Italy has had on the technology and the progress of civilization. Madonna did not make the list. However, one man with only one name did, which I think we all know, which is Galileo. And how about Enrique Fermi, one of the most important physicists ever to grace this globe? And Mr. Marconi, who I believe invented the radio, more or less. And then Rita Levi Montalcini, who really impressed me from her background. And by the way, I should just mention, what is it, 40 million Italians, 30 million Italians, something like that?
60.
50. Now you're catching up to the Germans. Out of that group, I just wanted to note, and this does not include the Peace Prize, this does not include literature, this is only physics, chemistry, mathematics, and medicine. Italy and Italian scientists and technologists have received 12 Nobel Prizes since the Nobel was created by the inventor of TNT, explosions, which is a story in and of itself. If my husband graces us with his attendance sometime today, I'll also introduce him. It was actually his idea that I create my own firm and work closely with entrepreneurial companies. And we have, in California, what's mine is his, and what's his is his. Gay marriages are not that much different than any other type of marriage, but it was really his idea to dive into this world of venture capital and entrepreneurship, so I had to say something to him. All right, guys, enough from me. How are you today?
Good, thanks.
Good. Tell us just a little bit about you, particularly in regard to Web3 and the Metaverse, Nicholas.
Oh, I try to stay as away as I can from Web3, but jokes aside, maybe a little bit how I'm related to it. I run a gaming company that I founded about 10 years ago called Face It, which today is called ESL Face It Group after we merged it and sold it to the Public Investment Fund.
Congratulations. How are you, Nicholas? Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
For once, it's not in Athens or any other wonderful spot. We had a wonderful dinner a number of years ago in Athens. And you and I've had the chance to stay in touch. Tell everybody about what you're doing in the broad metaverse area, please.
Well, I would say we're smack in the middle of Web3 in the sense that we're building an infrastructure for gaming. I think the whole idea comes behind sort of this view that we see of this change that is coming in the terms of digital ownership of assets. My background is in business development and sort of finance, and found myself in Switzerland about 10 years ago building in this space.
Excellent. You're a real leader. We're going to take a quick poll in a minute here. And you represent a wonderful company. I've had a tremendous opportunity to interact with some of your partners, and I might also say a leadership in diversity and inclusion at your company. So I commend you for that. Tell us a little bit about, as an investor and perhaps as an occupant, about your involvement in the metaverse.
Sure. So I was originally a games entrepreneur and listed my mobile games company on NASDAQ a few years ago, and then launched Hero Capital, which is the venture fund where we've worked with Mike and his team. We've now got about 600 million under management. We're named Hero Capital after HIRO, after Hero Protagonist, who, for the nerds in the audience, is the hero of the amazing sci-fi novel from 1992 by Neil Stephenson that first described and named the metaverse. So this idea of the metaverse, which has really been floating around since Alan Turing and people like that, well described by William Gibson in Neuromancer, was first named in 92. We named our fund after that. What we do is we invest half in video game studios, Web 2 and Web 3, but the other half is in infrastructure around these virtual and metaverse realities that people are beginning to build. Then I also have a business called SkinUps, which is a metaverse fashion business, which has worked with brands like Moncler, helping them get into Fortnite last year, the Moncler skins, and more recently Dolce & Gabbana. They launched a digital collectibles collection with SkinUps just a couple of days ago. Excellent. So we love Milan, and I spend a lot of time here.
Good. Yes, Italy is beautiful and wonderful, and we've all had the chance to be here a number of times, and commendation to all the Italians in the room. We don't have as many cities quite as beautiful as you have here in Italy. By the way, my own personal Web3 involvement, other than rereading Ready Player One recently.
Brilliant book. Yeah.
Which I actually think is close to my conception. But I'll also mention to you that I've had the chance to put some money into Animoca. Yeah. And tonight will be our keynoter at 5 o'clock will be Robbie Young, the CEO of Animoca, perhaps the largest single concentration of Metaverse, Web3, NFT-related companies. And I've also had a chance to invest in Mythical and Gala and Immutable, and there's quite a group of good companies out there and with excellent technologists involved. Okay, so I think why don't we stick with you? It's Luke, right?
Luke.
Yeah, excellent. You guys use short names now in England. So you're catching up to the United States on the short name thing, huh? Next time we'll have a nickname for you. Tell us a little bit about your definition of the metaverse, and if you care to, mention a little bit about what you think it's not.
Yeah. So it's not video games. It's not Fortnite or Roblox or whatever, although it's evolving out of that ecosystem. It's also not only or even always Web3. The metaverses can exist on decentralized, trustless data infrastructures, but they don't have to. And very often those things get confused. It's also not virtual reality, although it can be expressed in virtual reality. I think it's quite hard to describe what it is, but I think there's two key components to it. One horizontal, one vertical. Did I get that right? So two vertical bits, one set of horizontal layers. The two vertical bits are different ways of experiencing digital imaginary worlds. In not today, but in 10, 15 years' time, we will be able to swim into one type of imaginary world, which is entirely imaginary, doesn't exist in the real world. If I want to teleport onto the surface of the sun, into a satellite kind of in orbit around Alpha Centauri, or go and visit my mum who lives in Cornwall a long way away and feel like we're sitting in the same room, I can do that. And that's a purely virtual, imaginary ability to move around. That's an imaginary world. The other way the metaverse will express, which often gets forgotten in a lot of the discussion, is as a merging of imaginary digital worlds with the physical world. So overlays. It's partly this idea of augmented reality, but in 15 years' time, if we want to sit in this room and have it decorated like the Sistine Chapel, so that ceiling is on the ceiling above us, we will be able to sit here in the real world, in physical reality, on Corso Venezia, but this world will be painted with the Sistine Chapel ceiling, or with advertising from Meta or whatever, right? So those are two different expressions of the metaverse, one intrinsically wholly imaginary, the other immersed and interlinked with the real world. And that latter is really important, often gets forgotten, but that's, for example, what Microsoft and to some extent Apple are much more focused on. Then underneath those two vertical expressions of it are all these horizontal layers, and those are the bits that make it different from video games like Roblox and Fortnite. And those horizontal layers are the things that give you ownership of digital goods, the ability to trade and buy and sell and price those digital goods, the payment rails, the identity, so you can carry your digital identity between different imaginary worlds and be the same person and all of that. And those horizontal tech layers, I think that's partly what you're involved in building. It's a lot of what we invest in. It's really, really hard. It mostly doesn't exist yet. It's being built. But that stuff's the difference between the metaverse as it will be in the future and the internet that we have today.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. Nicholas?
My turn now. So
Good to see you.
good to see you too. I would say I'll go a step back, maybe, because I think in a way your question, which was, are we in the metaverse sort of now? In a way we are. I mean, if we just look like 20 years ago, when the internet sort of started, the type of things that we were discussing back then seemed impossible, seemed something which back then we were defining as a metaverse. But if we look at it today, 20 years later, I have friends which I can speak online with from all over the world. I can connect with them through games, for example. I can do my banking. I can pay my bills, and I can even find love just being online. So we created this generation created our own metaverse, or that interpretation of it, and it's built on something, let's say, called the internet. Now, today, well, where we have this metaverse, we're asking, so what's the next one? And I think what's missing goes back to, let's say, two main things. It's what this virtual representation of it is going to look like, and it's not going to be a game, because games are based on sort of this thrill, dopamine back and forth that needs to work, although when you have to do with, let's say, a persistent world, it has to be something that somebody can inhabit for a long term. And I think the other thing that we missed during the internet is that the internet essentially was built without a very sound economic model in it. It's basically ended up being advertising. And for us to participate in this metaverse now, we're renting out ourselves, our identity, our data, in order to have access to these things. So I think what's interesting with, at least from my perspective, from Web3, aside of the technologies, how do we make sure that we do find a way to assign correct value to these digital assets, find a way that we can give true ownership back to the people who sort of own this data, and build out, let's say, the new metaverse.
Excellent, thank you. Nicholas?
So I think about a year ago, I was in a SPAC process. We were about to sell a company, and suddenly, I think it was roughly 12 months ago, I started getting every meeting the question, what are your plans for the metaverse? And at a certain point, initially I sort of got around it saying, oh, we're going to look at the value chain, and once we have a better idea of the value chain, we're going to look into that. And eventually I just got tired of it, and I started answering with a very simple question, which is, what is the metaverse? And every single one of them was quiet. I couldn't get an answer. So everything you're reading about the metaverse, every person that wrote about it, and now I'm exaggerating a bit, I apologize, or invested into it, or started talking about investing into it, most often doesn't really have a definition for the metaverse. And that's what I noticed in that process. And I only got one good answer that I actually buy into, which is that the metaverse is when your digital life becomes more important than your real life. And if you ask me for gaming bets 10 years ago, like World of Warcraft was exactly like this. I have a mobile game on which I spend more than I spend for entertainment in my real life. I have more friends digitally and online than I have in my real life, probably because I'm a nomad and end up being all over the place. But I think it's something that is developing. It's that social layer I strongly believe in. Whether you call it a metaverse or simply a social layer on video games, I think it's very much the future. I think in gaming, it's part of the present. Whether it's going to go beyond gaming, I wonder whether it's the metaverse that starts catching more parts of your life, or whether it's simply gaming expanding. Because ultimately I think that in order to get someone inside that virtual life, you do need to create value for them
100%.
And engagement, and ultimately it's a game in a certain sense. The technologies, I guess, are going to be very similar. It might be a game itself. I think Roblox, Minecraft, and all these things are what already gets a little bit in that direction into expanding the audience. Then the Web3 component, I've always been extremely negative about adding that Web3 layer. I think Web3 is a technology. Cryptography is a technology that you can use. Blockchain is a technology that you can use, and you put them all together, and you might create some value. But the value doesn't come from the fact that it's called a blockchain, or that or anything else. You already have ownership of digital assets in a certain sense. Then legally they might tell you that it's not the case. But I think we were talking about it. I'd actually like to challenge that when it comes to a gaming company selling you a digital asset, whether you have ownership of it, or as they tell you, they own it and they're just letting you use it. And they do definitely have value, because, as we said, in gaming, your digital life is often more important than your real life. And I was always very skeptical of Web3 until a panel about a month and a half ago, where Christian Segestrale asked one simple question about Web3. And that question was, does it create value for users? And based on that question, I started thinking about Web3 in a very different way. Because the answer is yes. Interoperability, the compatibility, the ability to bring a digital skin from one game to another, from one universe to another, creates a ton of value for consumers. The biggest question, though, is, will it ever happen? Because that completely destroys the business model of most of the game publishers today, or most of the games that have value in those skins. And the answer probably is, it might happen the day that a very good game ends up adopting it. And most probably it's a game that is going to make Web3 great rather than Web3 making a game great, if it makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. By the way, I wanted to get a little sense from the audience, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and keep it up, okay? So I want to start with, who here is working in the metaverse? Okay, keep your hands up. Great, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of you. Invested, keep your hands up. Invested in the metaverse? Okay. Absolutely sure you know what the metaverse is? Raise your hand. And then it sounds like the big answer here will be, you want to know about the metaverse. Great. You know, I heard that there was a conference, I don't know if it was where Christian was or not, where the speaker said, how many of you were working on games related to the metaverse 6 months ago? And 3 people out of 100 raised their hands. And then he said, how many of you are working on developing something related to the metaverse? And almost the whole room raised their hands. So in 6 months, this became immensely popular with the masses. Help us understand, we'll start with Nicholas in the middle, how the metaverse relates to crypto, how it relates to NFTs. You mentioned all of this, but in a little more detail, how it relates to blockchain and these buzzwords that have become so popular.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's part of the problem, that these are buzzwords that are, and sort of the Web3 space is doing a really bad job of how they're communicating these, sort of these concepts around. I think at the end of the day, it's an underlying technology. It's the same example. So when you previously mentioned about how this is going to disrupt sort of the business model of the big studios, it's happened before, and I think it will happen again, and usually they're the ones that know how to adapt pretty well. I mean, even when the mobile phone came out, and suddenly gaming companies wanted to put their work on the device, but we were conditioned in a situation where we were fine to pay £1,000 for a phone, but we would never give $3.99 to buy an app. And so suddenly they were stuck, but how am I supposed to sell a game? And then sort of this new business model, which was free to play, came out, and the initial reaction from the gaming industry was, we're not touching this because we're spending so much money and investment in our product, so we don't see this as a solution. I think eventually it's the business model that needs to adapt, and it's the gaming companies that found ways to use this technology and use this sort of free-to-play concept and create those engaging experiences and find ways to monetize them. I think with Web3 and sort of the concept of NFTs, which is a very general concept, when it has to do with gaming, I would keep it very simple, that it has to do simply with those in-game items, right? And who owns them and how much you care about them. Currently, what you have is that people really care about them, and they really value them because whether it gives them a sort of a satisfaction or even sort of bragging rights, it's something that is valuable to them. But they cannot monetize it in a way that sort of it would be straightforward. And I think that's what NFTs should represent in the gaming space, simply how we're going to change this relationship between digital assets, their value, and ownership. Now, blockchain as a technology is quite simple. It's just essentially a ledger, like let's say a database which everybody can have access to. Everybody can at any point sort of see what's going on, and that's it. Now, how that will help in gaming, it's still the blockchain space shouting about gaming when that's not going to work. It's gaming companies that will figure out how they can use this underlying technology in order to create these experiences. So a good example that we're told a lot of times is that if I try to tell you now, try this game which is running on iOS, I have to describe the feeling of it. So try it because it's an action game and you're going to have a lot of fun. Imagine me telling you, try this game because it's running on Amazon Web Services and it's written in Xcode. Nobody would care, which is, I think, what pretty much the blockchain space is doing right now. We're shouting to gamers terms, NFT. But really the input they're getting from these terms is that they'll open the news, they'll see a picture of a monkey being sold for millions or somebody losing millions over these things. So they see it as a gambling sort of type of degenerates doing stupid things. So I think it's just we need to find ways to show value rather than show terms to the space. So yeah.
Luke, would you give us your definition of NFTs and then also just talk about this broader question of crypto, blockchain, NFTs, and where they fit into the metaverse?
Yeah, and I'll probably do it in reverse order, if I may. I think the vision of the metaverse, and it's not well described, and we don't know what it is yet because it doesn't exist yet, is something that will exist within about 20 years. If you remember, I'm old enough, some people in this audience will be old enough to remember the internet of the late 90s, dial-up modems, AOL, all these weird walled gardens. You know, if you were a degen back then, you were using ICQ, which was one of the early messaging systems to steal music from creators and share it with each other as MP3 files, and thought we were sticking it to the man when actually we were just stealing music from artists. And I think we're at that stage of the metaverse today. So if you remember what mobile internet was like in 2002, you had a Motorola or a Nokia little LCD screen. There was this thing called WAP, which was rubbish. We just discovered SMS and we didn't really know what you could do with it and so on. So we're there, and 2022 is 2022 is to the metaverse what 2002 was to the mobile internet, right? The metaverse in 20 years' time is going to be incorporating a lot of the themes we've talked about, these very immersive, very graphically rich, massively multi-user worlds, persistent imaginary worlds with hundreds of millions of people in them. And we're going to be able to move our identity through those worlds seamlessly. We're going to be able to buy and sell digital assets, clothes, which is why fashion is so important. I want my metaverse avatar to look beautiful, sexy, scary, whatever, right? And we're going to be able to own land and teleport around the imaginary universe and all this good stuff. We can't do any of those things today. You can do them in little narrow-walled gardens inside things like Fortnite or Roblox in the traditional games companies, or Sandbox or Decentraland. Those are basically walled garden game environments, much like AOL was a walled garden back in the day. Sandbox and Decentraland are open, but they're not really open because you can't take your character outside the game, you can't take clothes in the game anywhere else, etc., etc. There are the three different themes, three different things that people talk about. They talk about the metaverse, they talk about the blockchain, and they talk about Web3. Those three things are different, though they overlap. The metaverse is that massively multi-user, imaginary, interoperable world I just described, which we are 10 to 20 years from having successfully built. Blockchain is a database structure. It's a trustless, decentralized database structure as distinguished from the traditional centralized databases we normally use. That's a good thing if you think that governments are evil and you don't trust them, or the rule of law is going to collapse, or more generally, in a good way, if you think that it would be good if you could move data and objects and contracts around the global internet without having to rely on any central authority. That's the blockchain. Web3, which was actually initially kind of coined by Tim Berners-Lee, who's the guy who designed HTML5 and the kind of much of the modern internet, is the idea that there should be an iteration of the internet where we as users are in control of our own data and where we have ownership and property rights over our data and what we do on the internet. Those three things have all got mushed together in the way that people talk about these themes. You can see they all connect, and in that future vision of 20 years out, we will have a world that has all those benefits. We control our data, there is interoperability of assets globally, and there's a massively multi-user immersive space in which we can do all of that stuff. But they're different things, different bits of the tech space, and you can have centralized metaverses, like Facebook is trying to build, Meta is trying to build, where it all sits on a centralized database. You don't own your data, but it's still massively multi-user, and very immersive. Microsoft probably doing something similar. Apple probably doing something similar. And I'm sure in China, for government fiat, there will be a government metaverse where you definitely don't own your own data. Right? So we're very, very early days of this. I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of uncertainty about what it is and what it will be, because we're in the equivalent of 2002. Could any of us predicted what today's internet or smartphones look like back then? Not at all. We didn't know the iPhone was coming back then.
Nicholas, nobody's talked really about crypto. Please address the whole question of these buzzwords and the metaverse, but give us also a minute or two on where cryptocurrency fits into the metaverse.
I think cryptocurrency into the metaverse, and I'm not the expert here, I assume it fits as the currency used in order to pay for goods, most probably. And it's basically a currency that is decentralized and on a blockchain. I think where NFTs and crypto, like the real problem of everything you've said, which is all amazing, is the way that companies started using crypto, started using NFTs in the context of a metaverse. And both, I think, existing companies in a certain sense, or established companies, and new startups. Like every time I've seen NFTs inside a gaming business, 99% of the time it was a revenue line. And when you go into something that today doesn't have value, because the internet in 2000 had little value in a certain sense, I think it's different from where we are today, but I'm going to challenge it later on. I'd love to have an answer to that. But you're giving something that doesn't have value yet, but you're going into that with the idea, this is how I'm going to monetize. And as long as that happens, and we had it in our business plan, despite my fights against it, my point on NFTs was always very simple, and on crypto as well when it comes to how we use it as a company. As long as we think about it as a way to monetize, this is not going to work. Forget about that. If you start thinking about using this technology in order to create value for users, then maybe one day it's actually going to work to the point where you can have healthy monetization on top of it. But until you think about it as a monetization mechanic, and unfortunately, or a fundraising mechanic in the case of ICOs, and how they used ICOs in order to basically fundraise and promise an economy with its own currency in order to fundraise, as long as you think about it like that, you're not going to create value for users. And as a consequence, you're not going to actually succeed in the end, in the long run. You might make a quick buck, but that's it.
You know, the blockchain appears to many people to be into the future, not relevant today. But in fact, if you're in Sweden, your land deed may well be on the blockchain. And if you're in Latvia and Estonia, et cetera, your land deed is absolutely in the blockchain, because people in the governments were faking deeds. Someone would show up at your house and say, I own this house, and here's my deed. And now today, as these governments have used the blockchain, they can say, no, 55,000 computers say I own this, and that's more accurate. By the way, the largest food companies worldwide, they put their food movements on the blockchain. These cucumbers were picked here, they were processed here, this is where they've gone, and they're now at the and every time you just probably scan it, and it goes into this large database, and so when there's a food problem breakout, they can go into the blockchain and rapidly know exactly what lot, exactly where it's been, where it's related lots, and there are all kinds of other examples. Medical information, your financial information may live on the blockchain. So it's
a very brilliant Italian entrepreneur who I don't think is here, and I should have introduced him to Gabriel, who's created a business called, do you remember, Luca? I can't remember, Corvino or something, which is putting wine on the blockchain, starting actually with premium Barolos and premium Burgundy. We should have him here next year. Yeah. But it's with particularly those very, bottles that cost $1,500. Often people fake them, stick the label on, and so on and so forth. And it's about helping you trace the provenance, where it came from, where it was stored, how old it is, the ownership chain, all that good stuff. That's a good use of the blockchain.
As is art.
Absolutely.
Both partial ownership and
exactly.
full ownership. Okay, this is, I think, very important. Some people would see all of what we're talking about today as very niche. Help us understand, we'll start with you, Nicholas, how does the metaverse and all of its components, how do they become truly mainstream?
So in my opinion, the way they become truly mainstream is a little bit different from what you were saying. It's from gaming, and it's gaming expanding towards the mainstream. Because ultimately, in order to attract someone to spend time inside a virtual world, the easiest way, you need to create value somehow to these users. And I think the easiest way to start engaging with them is with gaming mechanics. Ultimately, gaming is nothing else than the putting engagement mechanics together and giving you the dopamine you need in order to retain and reattract the user, and expanding that with games that are more casual, that are more accessible, that are easier to get in there. I think the second question is the platform. So what is the platform that you're going to use? And I think that's the moment that we have an iteration on a platform that is somewhere in between VR and AR, that gives you the ability to access a VR-like world, but without the pains of having to use a VR headset and going through setting up a VR headset. I think at that moment it becomes way more accessible. So I think the problems are really, one is the content, so what type of content you're building and making it, and I believe gaming is a little bit the answer to that. And the second one is the hardware. So what is the platform and how to make it easier to access it.
How does this stuff all go mainstream?
Well, I mean, it goes down to, I think, a couple of different factors. First of all, I mean, investment in this space needs to continue. I mean, the type of investment that's been going into Web3 and these new technologies still needs to be there. We need to keep attracting the right type of people. I think the blockchain space or the Web3 space, it's just no more than 12 months or 18 months that it's really started attracting top talents from other industries, which I think is very important. And yes, we need to get, the technology needs to evolve outside of these demos that it has right now. Because the way that at least VR and AR are seen, to me, right now, it's very short dopamine injections in experiences that are okay for a demo. But if you want to be living in a persistent sort of environment, gaming will be a part of it. So in these virtual worlds, you'll have your time to game as you have in your real life. Like there's times that I have to study, let's say for school. There's times I want to go play football. There's times I just want to play with my friends. So gaming should be a space within sort of that grander environment that we're building. But I still think it goes back to right now, it's how this technology over the next 10 to 15 years will manage to take these concepts, because that's what they are. You know, NFTs in the beginning, it's a funding mechanism, it's swag sort of type of things, but eventually you want it to evolve into something a lot more meaningful. Because if you see sort of these communities, let's say for example in gaming, 99% of them are passive participants. We're playing a game, we're enjoying it. But there's that 1%, 2%, whatever it is, that actually add a lot of value. Those could be creators, those could be moderators, those could be community leaders, which currently are not sort of being understood by the system or being valued. So how we grow all of these different roles into something that makes sense is probably how we see the metaverse in the next 15, 20 years, let's say, come to life.
And Luke, you know about... I can't read that. Ask audience questions. Okay, thank you very much. This is again the difference between youth and age. At my age, you know, my emails, you know, the letters on my WhatsApp are like this. So Luke, you and your partner spent a lot of time talking exactly about this. You're not in the flash and the pan business. How do you guys decide who's going to be mainstream, and what are the criteria for being mainstream?
That's a really good question. I mean, we are very, very product focused and fun focused, right? So, as I said, half of, you know, we'll do in our current fund 60 investments. half of those will be game studios. When we're looking at a game, there's thousands of things you look at and a whole list of criteria and so on. But fundamentally, one of my business partners, a guy called Sir Ian Livingston, who founded Games Workshop, Warhammer, many of you may have played back in the 70s. If you remember Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, IDOS from the 90s. So he's got 5 games unicorns under his belt, three that exited in the last year. And he's always like, there are 3 things that matter in evaluating a game. Gameplay, right? Which is just the way, it's what the point you were making. It's got to be fun, right? It's got to be compelling and exciting and fun. And so when we're looking at games, we fundamentally look at that. And more widely, if we're looking at a tech platform, it's not about fun, it's about scalability and use case and all that stuff. But there's got to be a reason for all of this stuff to exist. A lot of the blockchain games pitches, to your earlier point, that we got in 2019, 2020, 2021, you'd have sort of 20, 30 page slide deck, of which 22 pages would be about the token design, which is all about how do I as the founder and you guys as the investor make a lot of money out of this thing, and you'd have 1 slide on the game. And we're like, that's the wrong way around. So the way this stuff goes mass market is by making people make experiences that are really fun. I think one reason why Techtalia intersects with that and why Italy could be so potent in the metaverse and should be more increasingly active in tech as we go forward is Italy's been so incredible over millennia, going back to the Romans, but very much also in the 20th and 21st century, in creating really powerful cultural output. Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Donatello and so on, but also Versace and Diesel, I think they're both here today, and Moncler and Armani and so on and so forth. These are strong cultural outputs, and that kind of tradition, European, Italian tradition of beauty and creativity, has not to a large extent intersected with the tech ecosystem yet. I think part of what's fun and interesting about a much more graphically rich version of the internet, which is part of what the metaverse is that that tradition of beauty and style can begin to integrate with technology, and that makes it much more mass consumer. Great gameplay is part of being a human and having fun. Beauty and style and the visual is another part of being human, and we haven't had much of that in tech, but the metaverse promises that we can begin to bring those things in.
And I like to mention collecting and sharing.
Yeah.
I mean, people before they lived in homes and lived in caves, they were collecting and sharing things too.
Absolutely, yeah, and drawing cave paintings, and the aesthetic matters to humans. We're naturally beauty-searching creatures. We haven't had much of that in tech over the last 30 years, but we're now at a point where we can begin to see it.
Excellent, thank you. Oh, hi. You guys so enthralled here. So this is always a pivotal moment, right? Because many of you have questions, but if the Americans are in the room, you never raise your hand when I ask for questions. And then 2 minutes out to the end, all of a sudden a bunch of Americans jump up with questions. So we have an amazing international group, so maybe we won't have that problem. Who has a question or a comment? Okay, great. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. And I've got a couple more questions, and if we have time, we'll come back to some more questions. Here's our nice Techtalia technologist. Go ahead, sir.
My question is, I've been reading a lot of stuff about the metaverse and like the possibility.
Can we have more volume, please?
It's not on.
It's not on.
This is my favorite.
is.
Don't you guys love this? There's nothing better than being at a Sony or a Dolby meeting and you get 5 people up there trying to make the technology work. How are we doing?
Yeah, now it's on. So basically, my question is, we're saying about this virtual world where millions of people can play together and experience, play, live, and do a lot of stuff. But I guess that right now the metaverse industry is focusing a lot on experiences and what the metaverse could be. But in the end, I think that like the question is, how do we solve the light speed problem in the metaverse? So because basically like when Fortnite made the Travis Scott concert with 15 million people watching it, actually they were like 15,000 concerts of 100 people, because of course the network is not sufficiently speed, like the speed of the packets going on in the internet architecture is not enough.
Well, that is a great question, and so what you're describing there is absolutely true, that at the moment we think we're in these massively multi-user games. Fortnite and all these other games have 100 million users a day. Actually, we're all existing in these little digital shards, they're called, with 100 people at most in them. So you're not really in a big social environment. They're just sort of making you think and make it look like a big social environment. We can't overcome the speed of light, right? It's a constant, I think Einstein would tell us, the reason we're 20 years from doing this stuff at scale is partly those kind of reasons. That's a big part of the reason. We simply do not have an internet, cloud infrastructure, data centers. We don't have enough energy, quite apart from the networking gear, to solve those kind of massively super-scaled interoperability problems. There are lots of people working on those problems at fundamental layers of the internet. There are people working on them at the software and generative layers of how you generate these worlds, but it's a really, really hard problem. That's why we're very, very early in it.
Nicholas, anything you want to add to that, or should we go to the next question?
I do wonder why you actually need to solve that. So
it's also a good point.
Reality is, are you ever in a room with 1 million people? No. Like in your real life, imagine 1 million people in a room. I mean, that's a nightmare. It's imagine 1 million people talking at the same time. Like, you don't want that. And you can imagine what you have today in Fortnite as a concert with 15 million people inside a stadium that has many different compartments, and you interact with the 50 people that are around you. When you want to interact with someone else, you move in the same way that you would do in real life, and you go in the next compartment. Simply, the technology needs to make sure that as you move, you basically move to the next one, and it becomes a marginal movement. And today, I think we're already there, roughly. I don't think you need to get to that concurrency running in one single universe per se. It's technically speaking, it's I don't see it as.
Yeah, because like if I can just add something, it's.
Well, you're not a reporter.
No.
There are no follow-ups in the metaverse. Short.
I just want to say, like, yes, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, we have experiences like EVE Online, for example, which are very, like, what I believe is like one of the most present examples of what a metaverse could be. Yeah. Because, like, I have a friend that was being paid $100 a month for being the accountant of a corporation that does not exist in the real world. And so basically, like, I see that as increasing the level of those experiences could really create an economy that connects to the real world and it's something new at the same time. And to do that, probably you need to scale the server architecture, because EVE Online can do that because they use a lot of tricks on like not having a lot of people together, and they stress a lot their servers because of when they do like the very big battles that are like every frame is like 6 seconds of delay probably, and they still can do really big battles. But I just want to say, like, I think there are a lot of issues on that.
Yeah.
TikTok length questions and answers in our last 2 minutes. I think you have the next question in the blue. Somebody over here did.
Yeah, mine was TikTok related.
Was it Mike?
So, Mike from Skydia.
Sponsor of the Last Supper.
Not last night's supper, but.
And I believe pictured in the Last Supper. So be there Sunday. Be there on Sunday to see the Last Supper, Mike.
I can Photoshop it.
You're looking very good for 4,000 years old.
Yes. So my question, obviously Meta has complained about ATT and Apple, but it was really TikTok just sucking up all the engagement from users and advertisers. And how do you see huge platforms like TikTok, which is dominating today? I don't know if they will be in 10 years where it's a fad, but WeChat, these massive platforms that could kind of be anything. How do they play into the metaverse, and what do you predict there?
You want to start with that, Nicholas?
I'll try. I mean, I think currently social media platforms feel probably the closest that we have in a metaverse in terms of how we interact and how we communicate with people. So I definitely think they have a big role to play. I just think that most of these companies, their DNA fundamentally will have to change. I think that gaming companies have this unique position that they can attract the most advanced technical people and the most creative people. And when you put those things together, that's usually when you can sort of get the sparks. And I think that social media companies still lack that part, and that's where I see sort of more, I don't know if TikToks or things are going to be just a communication layer inside there, but I still think that it's gaming companies that are going to push the metaverse narrative sort of front.
Anything you want to add to that, Luke or Nicholas? We'll take the third question if not. Let's go for the third question. And I think we have the third question over here, and then we're going to wrap up.
Knowing that we are at the early stage of this space, what do you think are the technological evolutions that we need to go through in order to make it become mass adoption? And I mean, internet speed, of course, was one of those, but I'm wondering, what do you think are the few tech evolution that we really need to get to mass adoption?
I mean, I think the biggest, I think there's lots of different pieces of what needs to happen, but the big thing, which is the hardest thing, is interoperability. So if you think, I mean, you think from an identity or a fashion point of view, for instance, I want my avatar that holds my data, who I am, what I like, the kind of places I visit, but belongs to me. I then want to be able to move that from a work metaverse where I can meet my colleagues and do conferences or meetings, to a home metaverse where I can go visit my in-laws, my parents, whatever, to a game metaverse, to a dating metaverse. We have no mechanism today for carrying that identity across those places. There's an even bigger problem. Well, if I want to look roughly the same and I have a favorite Gucci jacket or some really cool sneakers that I want my digital avatar to wear, how can I carry those through? How can I particularly carry those through from a Fortnite-like world with sort of simple cartoony characters to a Roblox world with horrible 3D voxels, no offense to Roblox, to some beautiful, Renaissance Italian imaginary world, with a very different graphical style and so on. So those are all interoperability problems. They're technical interoperability problems. They're graphical interoperability problems. They're also contractual interoperability problems that Epic and Facebook and all these different companies, or even the Animoca companies, don't want you talking to. I mean, you've got Robbie here later. Animoca's a Web3 investor with probably hundreds of games under investment, most, not all of them, built on the Ethereum blockchain. There is almost no interoperability between any of those games, and he's a Web3 blockchain games environment. I don't know if he's here today. You are. I mean, that's true, isn't it, Robbie? Yeah, interoperability is really, really hard, right? And the Web3 businesses will probably begin to solve that, at least at the level of portability of assets and money, before the Web2 guys. But that's the hardest problem. There's an open metaverse interoperability thing, which I think the Animoca brands are right front and center of. There is a Epic, I think Microsoft, Walmart, a whole bunch of big corporates doing an interoperability panel. But it's like early internet. They're just beginning to talk about that. They're really, really gritty technical problems of how you get that stuff working. That stuff will probably solve over the next decade. The massively immersive, super scaled, massively multi-user stuff is going to take a couple of decades.
And we're just so glad that Robbie can be with us most of the day. Please make sure you're here at 5 o'clock for his keynote speech. He's truly one of the great visionaries along with his partners. And maybe if we're lucky, Robbie might address, and if not, Gabriel's promised to put this on the agenda next year, the topic we haven't discussed regarding the metaverse, which is, of course, love and sex in the metaverse. Grazie mille.
Thank you.